Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're digging into one of my favorite questions. Where do great ideas really come from? We have this image of a lone genius and a sudden lightning bolt of inspiration. But the real story, it's usually a lot weirder, and honestly, way more interesting than that. Let's get into it. So, what in the world could a British tea company from the 50s, the absolute pinnacle of space exploration, and a busted old TV possibly have in common? Well, the answer, believe it or not, is innovation. And each one of these tells a totally surprising story about where game-changing ideas are actually born. For our first story, we're not starting in some high-tech lab in Silicon Valley. Nope. Our story starts with a cup of tea. We're going back to post-war Britain to meet one of the most unlikely innovators you've ever heard of. So, meet J. Lyons and Company. In the middle of the 20th century, these guys were an absolute powerhouse, running tea shops, bakeries, and restaurants all across the UK. They were masters of logistics and food service, not electronics. So what on earth do they have to do with the history of computing? Well, as it turns out, pretty much everything.
And this is where the story gets really good. Back in 1947, a couple of managers from Lyons went to the US and saw one of the world's very first computers, ENIAC. Now, they didn't see a scientific novelty. They saw a solution. They realized a machine like that could finally tame the absolute mountain of paperwork and logistical chaos of their giant catering business. The innovation wasn't born from some dream of invention. It was driven by pure, practical need.
And get this, they didn't just sit on the idea. Lyons put their money where their mouth was. They actually funded a university computer project before deciding, you know what, we'll just build our own. They called it LEO, the Lyons Electronic Office. By 1951, it was running its first real-world business job, and just 5 years later, it was doing the payroll for huge companies like Ford. A tea company had just kicked off the age of business computing.
And you have to understand, what Leo was doing was absolutely mind-blowing for the time. This wasn't just some glorified calculator. It was figuring out daily orders for all their tea shops, managing inventory, running payroll, and spitting out management reports. It was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first integrated management information system. And it was created by a tea shop that just had a really big problem to solve. All right, let's jump from a very down-to-earth problem to, well, the exact opposite. For our second story, we're going to see how the pure, simple act of exploration can accidentally spark innovations that change our daily lives in ways nobody could have ever predicted. Think about it. When NASA builds something, it has to work in the most hostile environment we know, the vacuum of space. But what's so cool is that this super specialized tech almost never stays in space. It finds its way back home. These are called spin-offs, and they are this incredible engine of innovation, all driven by our curiosity to explore. Okay, let's take magnetometers. It's a fancy word, but basically, they're these super sensitive gadgets that can read tiny magnetic fields. NASA uses them to study distant planets. But what happens when you turn that powerful technology back toward Earth?
Well, this is where it gets wild. The applications are just incredible. Miners use them to steer massive drills deep underground. Police have used them to find evidence in cold cases that are decades old. And in hospitals, doctors can use them to detect the faint magnetic signature of your heart, giving them a whole new way to diagnose problems. A tool built for other worlds gives us a new way to see our own.
Okay, get ready for another one, because this connection is just fantastic. How on earth do you draw a straight line from one of the greatest scientific instruments ever built, the Hubble Space Telescope, to your weekly trip to the supermarket? It all comes down to 3D imaging. The tech used to sharpen Hubble's images was first adapted by FedEx to build a system that could instantly scan and measure millions of packages. And then that tech was adapted again for Kroger grocery stores to create these scan tunnels that let you just slide an entire cartload of groceries through self-checkout in one go, from the depths of space right to the express lane. And this quote, man, it just says it all. This came from the inventor of a high-tech prayer mat. He used NASA-tested ergonomic materials, originally for astronauts, to make it more comfortable. He saw a solution for one context and applied it to a completely different one. That's what exploration-driven innovation is all about, finding new problems for brilliant solutions that already exist.
Okay, for our last story, we're coming all the way back down to Earth. And I mean way down. We're going from billion-dollar space agencies to a workshop, where innovation isn't driven by big budgets, but by pure, scrappy resourcefulness. So first, a super quick science lesson. A Stirling engine is this really clever piece of tech from way back in 1816.
It runs on any external heat source, like the sun, and it's incredibly efficient. A team of engineers and students decided to build one powered by solar energy, but they were missing one very important part.
So where did they find this crucial part? Not in a catalog, not in a lab. They found it here, in a giant, old, discarded rear projection TV. To most of us, it's just junk. But to them, hidden inside was the one thing they needed to make their engine work. This is innovation that comes from seeing potential where everybody else just sees trash.
And just look at how they did this. It's pure ingenuity. They ripped open the TV to get the special lens inside. They took an old air compressor and repurposed it to be the engine block. They even built a custom copper part from scratch to make it more efficient. This wasn't about buying new parts, it was about creatively mashing together whatever they could get their hands on.
And did it work? Oh yeah, it worked. The data proves it. They managed to create a massive temperature difference between the hot side and the cool side of the engine. Almost 400 degrees Celsius. That's exactly what you need. They literally built a functioning, powerful engine out of junk.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got a tea shop, the space program, and a pile of scraps. 3 totally different stories. So what does all this tell us about what innovation really looks like?
Let's just lay it all out. J. Lyons and Company, their driver was necessity. They had a huge problem and they had to fix it. NASA, their driver was exploration. The desire to see what's out there created tools that changed life right here. And that engine team? Their driver was pure resourcefulness, creating something amazing with very little.
And this brings us to the single biggest takeaway from all of this. We really have to ditch this myth that innovation is some kind of magical lightning strike. The reality is so much more grounded, and honestly, it's so much more accessible to all of us. At its core, innovation is about seeing a practical problem right in front of you and trying to solve it, like the folks at Lyons. It's about taking a cool idea from one place and seeing if it works in a totally new one, just like all those NASA spinoffs. And sometimes it's just about tinkering and messing around with what you've got, like the team that built an engine from an old TV. Which leaves us with one last really exciting question to think about. If innovation can come from a tea shop, a space mission, or a junk pile, where is the next world-changing idea going to come from? Well, as we've seen today, the answer is it could come from anywhere. Thanks so much for watching.